Emilina Rocha learned very early that silence could be a form of survival, but she did not yet understand that the same silence could later become a prison. She was born in a modest neighborhood on the edge of São Paulo, in a small apartment that always smelled faintly of cleaning soap and burnt coffee. Her mother, Lucia, was only 20 when she had Emilina, abandoned before promises could harden into anything real. There was no dramatic farewell, no apology worth remembering, only absence, which settled into their lives like furniture no one had chosen but learned to live around. From the beginning, Emilina grew up watching her mother fight the world with tired hands and a stiff smile, and she absorbed the lesson without being taught. Love meant endurance, and endurance meant never asking for too much. As a child, Emilina was observant rather than loud. She noticed how adults' voices changed when bills were discussed, how her mother's shoulders sagged after long workdays at the salon, how neighbors smiled kindly but never stayed long. She learned how to fold herself into corners, how to speak only when spoken to, how to become agreeable enough to avoid conflict. Teachers described her as polite, quiet, and mature for her age. What they did not see was how carefully she measured every word, every expression, afraid that being too much might cost her what little stability she had. Her relationship with her mother was close, but complicated. Lucia loved Emilina fiercely, yet that love often carried the sharp edge of resentment, though neither of them ever named it. Emilina represented sacrifice, a life redirected, dreams postponed indefinitely. On good days, Lucia would braid Emilina's hair and tell her stories about the future, about how everything would be better someday. On bad days, silence filled the apartment, thick and unspoken, and Emilina learned not to disturb it. She learned that love could be present and heavy at the same time. When Emilina grew older, the distance between who she was and who she was expected to be widened quietly. She did well in school, not because she loved learning, but because excellence felt like protection. Good grades meant approval. Approval meant fewer arguments, fewer sighs of disappointment. She worked part-time jobs, as soon as she was legally allowed, contributing what she could, never complaining. Her dreams were practical, modest, carefully shaped to avoid disappointment. She did not imagine wealth or freedom. She imagined stability. By the time she reached her mid-20s, Emilina was living alone in a small rented apartment and working as a customer relations analyst for an insurance company. The job required patience, empathy, and emotional restraint skills she had perfected long before the role demanded them. Every day, she listened to strangers describe accidents, losses, and frustrations, and every day she responded with calm professionalism, offering solutions that were never quite enough. She went home exhausted, not from work itself, but from the constant performance of composure. Her relationship with her mother had changed by then. Calls were shorter, visits were less frequent. Lucia had grown restless, dissatisfied with the life she had built, eager for something that felt like a reward after years of struggle. That was when Roberto entered the picture. Roberto Valença was everything Emilina was not. Confident, loud, polished, and visibly successful, he filled rooms with his presence. He owned several auto parts businesses and spoke fluently about growth, investments, and image. From the moment Emilina met him, she felt a quiet discomfort she could not immediately explain. Roberto smiled too easily, asked questions that felt more like evaluations, and spoke about family reputation, as though it were currency. He treated Emilina with courteous distance, the kind reserved for people who did not quite belong. Lucia, however, was enchanted. With Roberto, she felt chosen, admired, elevated. Emilina watched the transformation with mixed emotions, relief that her mother was happy, and fear that this happiness came with conditions. Roberto encouraged changes, better clothes, better social circles, better presentation. Subtly, Emilina felt herself becoming an inconvenience, a reminder of a past Lucia was eager to outgrow. When Lucia announced her engagement, Emilina congratulated her sincerely, though something inside her tightened. The wedding plans moved quickly, lavish and ambitious, as if speed itself could guarantee success. Emilina was invited at first, included in conversations about dates and venues, but gradually, her presence faded from the planning. Roberto took control of details, finances, decisions. Emilina noticed how often her mother deferred to him, how easily her own opinions were dismissed. 2 days before the wedding, Emilina's life shifted in a way that no amount of preparation could have predicted. It happened on an ordinary evening, after a long workday that left her shoulders aching and her mind numb. On impulse, she stopped by a small lottery shop near the bus terminal. She rarely played, believing luck was something other people talked about, not something that happened to her. That night, however, she bought a ticket without thinking too deeply, choosing numbers at random, more out of habit than hope. She folded the ticket carefully and placed it in her wallet, forgetting about it almost immediately. The next morning, she nearly missed the notification on her phone. It appeared quietly, without drama, just another alert among many. When she opened it, her brain refused to process what her eyes were seeing. She refreshed the screen. She checked again. Her heart did not race. Instead, everything slowed. 18 million tieren. The number was so large it felt abstract, like a concept rather than reality. Emilina sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the screen, her mind moving cautiously, afraid that excitement might break. Something fragile. She verified the ticket. She checked official sources. Each confirmation pressed the truth deeper into her body until it became undeniable. She had won. Her first instinct was not celebration, it was silence. She did not tell her coworkers. She did not call her mother. She did not even tell her closest acquaintances. For the first time in her life, she possessed something entirely her own, something no one could shape, judge, or take away, at least not yet. Silence felt like safety. Silence felt like control. And in that silence, a plan began to form. Emilina thought of her mother immediately. Years of struggle. Years of sacrifice. She imagined erasing debts, securing comfort, giving Lucia a future free from worry. She imagined revealing the truth at the wedding, transforming the day into something unforgettable, not out of spite, but as a declaration of love. A gift so powerful it would rewrite everything that had been difficult between them. She told herself it was generosity. She told herself it was closure. She told herself it had nothing to do with wanting to be seen. The day before the wedding, Emilina received a message from her mother. The tone was hesitant, the words carefully chosen as if rehearsed. Lucia explained that Roberto was under pressure, that the event was formal, that certain appearances mattered. Then came the sentence Emilina would replay in her mind for weeks afterward. "Daughter, I'd rather you not come. My fiancé thinks you embarrass us." Emilina read the message repeatedly, each time feeling something inside her fracture a little more. Embarrass us. As though she were something shameful, something to be hidden on an important day. She did not argue. She did not defend herself. She replied with a single word. "Okay." She placed the phone down and sat very still, listening to the sounds of the city outside her window. Somewhere, people were preparing for celebrations. Somewhere, her mother was choosing flowers and vows. And inside Emilina's bank account, an unimaginable amount of money waited quietly, holding the power to heal or destroy everything. That afternoon her phone rang again. This time it was the bank. The representative spoke politely at first, congratulating her, outlining procedures, discussing security measures. Emilina listened calmly, answering questions with practiced composure. Toward the end of the call, however, the tone shifted. "There was a transfer request earlier today," the representative said. "Ta million bolinhan." Emilina felt her breath catch. "From my account?" "Yes," he replied. It was flagged for verification. The recipient, he explained, was a corporate holding connected to Roberto Valença. The silence Emilina had relied on suddenly felt dangerous. She ended the call with a tight chest and a racing mind, fragments of memory rearranging themselves into something ugly and undeniable. Roberto's interest in finances, his urgency, his confidence. She realized then that her secret was no longer safe simply because she had kept it quiet. The gift she had planned was no longer innocent, and the wedding was only hours away. Emilina spent the next hour sitting by her window, the city sprawling beneath her in chaotic harmony. Buses honked in the distance, people shouted, dogs barked, and life moved forward as if nothing extraordinary had just happened. She barely registered it. Her mind was elsewhere, turning over the bank call again and again, considering the implications of the attempted transfer. 2 million turned. Not merely money, but power, leverage, betrayal. The knowledge that someone had tried twice to take what was hers made a cold fire rise inside her. Anger, for once, was not muted by caution. It was sharp, immediate, and controlling. She considered calling the police, but she knew that action required preparation. Evidence, timelines, documentation all needed to be precise. Panic, she realized, was a luxury she could not afford. Instead, she breathed, slowly, made herself a strong cup of coffee, and began plotting. Her plan was no longer simply a gift. It had evolved into something more calculated, something that demanded attention without carelessness. Emilina was no longer willing to let fear dictate her actions. Fear had almost cost her everything. By mid-afternoon, she packed a small bag. Inside went essentials, her phone, wallet, the lottery ticket itself, and a folder containing copies of her identification and account details. She dressed in muted, professional clothing, a dress that allowed her to blend but not vanish entirely. When she looked in the mirror, she did not search for approval. She searched for readiness. There was something about a face that reflected self-possession, even in the quietest moments, that made her feel almost invincible. Almost. The bus ride to the wedding venue was disorienting. She watched strangers come and go, unaware that history, wealth, and danger were riding with them. Every so often, she caught herself imagining Roberto's face when he discovered the truth, imagining Lucia's reaction, imagining the shock of a room full of people suddenly confronted with betrayal and secrecy. She pushed the thoughts aside. She was careful not to let anticipation become arrogance. Plans were one thing, execution required restraint. When Emilina arrived, the estate rose before her like a memory made real. It was vast, a colonial mansion restored to an almost unreal sheen, with gardens that stretched longer than she remembered, and flowers chosen with meticulous taste. Music floated from open windows, strings, and light percussion, setting a rhythm of celebration that felt almost mocking. Emilina did not enter immediately. She paused, taking in the space, remembering past disappointments, remembering herself as the girl who had always been told to stay in the corner. That girl would not exist today. Inside, guests mingled, laughing and raising glasses. Emilina slipped through unnoticed, her posture calm, her expression measured. For a brief moment, she felt the old familiar tug, the urge to disappear, to be small, to avoid confrontation, but she resisted. She had waited too long, endured too much. Tonight, invisibility was no longer an option. She found her mother immediately, standing near a cluster of friends and acquaintances. Lucia's posture was different than Emilina remembered, straighter, more polished, but tension threaded beneath the surface. She looked radiant, almost fragile, and Emilina felt the familiar pull of empathy. But she did not soften. The weight of months of planning, waiting, and strategizing had built a wall she would not abandon. Roberto noticed her first. His smile faltered for an instant, a fraction of a second too long, and Emilina knew he understood the threat she represented. He excused himself from his guests and approached her, his expression a careful blend of irritation and measured charm. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly. "I know," Emilina replied evenly, holding his gaze. There was no tremor, no plea, no uncertainty, just acknowledgement. He gestured around subtly, as if to remind her that appearances mattered. "This is not the place for drama." "I am not here for drama," Emilina said softly. "I am here to witness." Roberto's eyes narrowed. "I'll cause a scene." Emilina tilted her head slightly. "I don't intend to," she said. Her calmness unsettled him more than any argument could. Confidence, when quiet and controlled, can be sharper than anger. As the ceremony began, Emilina seated herself at the back, blending with staff and early guests. She observed quietly, noticing how Lucia moved, how she smiled at friends, how Roberto positioned himself with careful authority. It was almost perfect, the kind of perfection constructed for outsiders. Emilina could not feel bitterness, she felt clarity. Every detail was visible, every gesture readable, every pretense thin and temporary. During the vows, Emilina's phone vibrated in her bag. She ignored it twice, then checked. A message from the bank flashed on the screen, urgent confirmation required regarding attempted access to restricted funds. Her heart beat faster, but her exterior remained serene. Calm was a weapon. She slipped out toward a side exit, glancing back to ensure she was not noticed. Outside, the evening air was cool, cutting, sharpening her senses. She dialed immediately. The representative's voice was tense, stripped of formality. "Ms. Rocha," he said, "there has been a second attempt to authorize the transfer using notarized documentation submitted today." "Whose signature?" Emilina asked, her voice measured but urgent. "Two signatures," he replied. "Yours and your mother's." The word struck Emilina with a force she had not anticipated. The possibility that her mother had unknowingly, or worse, knowingly, authorized the transfer shook her more than Roberto's manipulation. "I did not sign anything," she said firmly. The representative reassured her, explaining that the funds remained secure but emphasized that the situation might involve legal action if fraud were confirmed. Emilina ended the call, her mind racing. Betrayal, she realized, often wears the mask of love. Returning to the ceremony, she observed the couple exchanging vows. Guests applauded. The sound was hollow now, irrelevant to her. She moved forward deliberately, the calm in her body commanding attention. Without a word, she reached her mother just as Roberto leaned in to kiss her cheek. Lucia's smile faltered when she saw Emilina, her eyes widening. "M.E.?" Lucia whispered, tone catching between shock and confusion. "We need to talk now," Emilina said, steady and firm. Roberto's face tightened. "This is not appropriate," he barked. Emilina turned to him slowly, her calmness a weapon. "You attempted to take Rand $22 million from me. Twice," she said plainly. The words reverberated through the room, muting conversation, drawing eyes. Lucia's face paled. "What are you saying?" she whispered. Roberto laughed nervously. "She's confused," he said, but the tone lacked conviction. Emilina pulled out her phone. "The bank disagrees, so will the authorities," she added. Security arrived quietly, guided by Emilina's firm instructions. Roberto's protests were futile. Within minutes he was escorted from the premises, his authority evaporating. Emilina felt a weight lift, a satisfaction tempered by years of restraint. Lucia, standing amidst the chaos, looked at her daughter with a mixture of fear, shame, and dawning respect. "You've done this," Lucia whispered. "I've stopped pretending," Emilina said, her voice held finality, and for the first time she did not apologize. The aftermath of that wedding was quieter than Emilina expected, yet heavier than any celebration she had attended in her life. Guests trickled out, murmuring apologies, glances cast like judgment, whispers carrying questions that would never reach her ears directly. Emilina remained with her mother, standing amid the remnants of a day that was supposed to be luminous. Glasses had been emptied, flowers wilted, and the music had stopped, leaving only the echo of disruption. She realized then that the power of truth did not announce itself with fanfare. It settled quietly, reshaping the air around it, altering relationships permanently in ways that could not be undone. Lucia stood near a dismantled centerpiece, her hands clutching the tablecloth as if holding herself upright required physical support. She had not yet cried, though her eyes were wet with unshed tears. Emilina observed her mother without speaking, allowing silence to carry the weight. Years of misunderstanding, hidden resentment, and unspoken fear now lay bare between them. And Emilina understood that the delicate threads connecting them had shifted irreversibly. "What have you done?" Lucia finally whispered, voice trembling. This isn't how it was supposed to be." "I've revealed what needed to be revealed," Emilina replied evenly. "I've stopped pretending everything is acceptable when it is not." Lucia's lips quivered and she sank into a nearby chair. "I did know," she said almost too quickly, her voice carrying a mix of fear, guilt, and desperation. "I did know Roberto what he said he was protecting us. He said it was protecting you?" Emilina interrupted, her voice calm but sharp. "By trying to steal from me. Twice?" The question hung in the air, heavier than any accusation could have been. Lucia's face fell. For a long moment neither spoke, and Emilina realized that confrontation, while terrifying, also brought clarity. Finally, Lucy exhaled an unsteady breath and admitted, "I thought it was paperwork. Something routine. I didn't think to question it. I wanted to trust him." The confession was painful but honest. Emilina absorbed it without immediate judgment. She had expected fury, betrayal, perhaps tears of defiance, but not honesty. There was still a glimmer of her mother. Truth beneath layers of mistakes and misplaced trust. The police arrived within the hour, quietly, professionally. They collected statements, documented events, and reviewed security footage. Emilina answered questions with precision, each word measured, deliberate. She did not dramatize or embellish. Her control of the situation unsettled Roberto, as supporters and friends alike. When the officers left, they assured her that the investigation would move swiftly and that evidence indicated deliberate fraudulent attempts to access her funds. Emilina let the gravity of the statement settle. She did not feel triumph, only a measured satisfaction that justice would now be pursued with her terms intact. In the days that followed, Emilina retreated to her apartment, the space feeling simultaneously smaller and more secure than ever before. She reorganized her life, separating herself from everything that had previously dictated her actions. She hired financial advisors and legal consultants, individuals who spoke in precise terms, percentages, and strategies rather than emotional appeals. For the first time, Emilina realized that wealth could serve a purpose beyond immediate gratification. It could create independence, security, and above all, boundaries. Her relationship with Lucia remained cautious. Visits became structured, deliberate, and emotionally regulated. Some conversations drifted to mundane topics, the weather, neighborhood gossip, and simple daily routines. Others were heavier, exploring accountability, regret, and the nuances of trust. Lucia began attending therapy, grappling with decisions that had once seemed minor but had contributed to deep familial wounds. Emilina observed from a distance, resisting the urge to intervene, understanding finally that autonomy was essential for healing. Months passed, and Emilina's life began to fill with choice rather than obligation. She traveled for the first time without needing permission, navigating cities where her identity was unknown and irrelevant. These moments, small yet profound, allowed her to reconnect with herself, separate from the expectations of family, society, or even the weight of her newfound wealth. Each city walked, each street explored, became a reclamation of the parts of herself that had been quieted for too long. Writing became her sanctuary. She unearthed notebooks from adolescence, filled with half-formed stories and fragmented characters struggling for recognition, understanding, and survival. Emilina began to write again, not for public consumption, not for validation, but as a conversation with herself. Words flowed as therapy, memory, and expression coalesced, building a bridge between the silent girl she had been and the woman she was becoming. Each page represented autonomy and awareness, a declaration that her life was her own to narrate. The investigation into Roberto expanded as Emilina had anticipated. Former partners, clients, and business associates came forward, revealing patterns of manipulation, deceit, and financial exploitation. The evidence accumulated, documenting crimes spanning years. Emilina did not follow the trials obsessively. She allowed the process to proceed without personal drama, trusting the system she had once ignored to enforce consequences where charm and deceit had previously prevailed. When final judgments were rendered, Roberto sentenced to prison, assets frozen, influence nullified, she felt only quiet relief. Justice had been served without spectacle, and the world had shifted to reflect truth over pretense. Throughout this period, Emilina cultivated her own network of trusted advisors and confidants. She began discreetly funding initiatives she believed in, educational programs, women's shelters, and financial literacy projects for young adults navigating life without guidance. These acts were not performative, they were conscious choices to use her resources for meaningful impact. Emilina observed the effects quietly, measuring success not in recognition, but in the subtle improvements in people's lives. Her relationship with Lucia evolved slowly. Visits remained structured, but conversations deepened. The mother who had once sought reassurance and validation now sought guidance and reflection. Lucia admitted fault without excuse, acknowledged her failures, and began demonstrating responsibility in ways Emilina had never seen. The daughter, once silent and hesitant, now held the authority of experience and security. Their dynamic shifted from dependency to mutual, fragile understanding. As the anniversary of the wedding approached, Emilina did something private yet symbolic. She returned to the now empty venue alone. The rooms, once filled with laughter, celebration, and deception, were quiet. The flowers had wilted, the music was gone, and only the structure remained. She walked the gardens slowly, recalling every moment, every sensation, every choice she had made, leading up to that day. Sitting on a familiar bench, she allowed herself to feel the full spectrum of her emotions: loss, anger, pride, relief, and finally, release. For the first time, she let closure exist without fanfare or performance. Emilina's wealth, once a secret waiting to be revealed, no longer held the same allure. It was a tool, yes, a safeguard, but it was clarity, independence, and deliberate choice that mattered most. She created a trust, managed professionally, ensuring her mother security while preserving her autonomy. When she revealed this to Lucia, gratitude and restraint were visible but not subservience. "Thank you for trusting yourself first," Lucia said, and Emilina recognized it as one of the most profound acknowledgments she had ever received. By the second year following the wedding, Emilina's personal transformation was evident. She spoke with directness, set boundaries without guilt, and engaged in relationships from a place of choice rather than necessity. The city she lived in, once overwhelming and threatening, now felt navigable, almost intimate. Strangers did not recognize her as the girl who had learned silence as survival. And she moved among them with a quiet confidence, invisible yet formidable. Late at night, Emilina sometimes revisited memories of the girl who had stood at the back of the wedding, silent, secretive, and small. Compassion for that version of herself rose naturally. Not pity but respect. The endurance that had once protected her now seemed like preparation, a necessary foundation for the life she was actively shaping. She understood the lessons embedded in every hardship, every betrayal, every quiet moment of observation. Her mother continued her journey toward independence, moving to a smaller apartment and living according to her own decisions. Their interactions became exercises in mutual recognition rather than obligation. Emilina no longer carried the emotional weight for both of them. Instead, she offered guidance when requested and allowed Lucia to navigate her own accountability. The balance was delicate but sustainable, rooted in honesty rather than avoidance. Through these transformations, Emilina discovered an unexpected freedom, the ability to define herself outside of anyone else's expectations, wealth, or influence. She could make choices without apology, pursue passions without hesitation, and build relationships without compromising her integrity. The girl who had once folded herself into corners to survive was now present, visible, and unafraid. Emilina's life had entered a new chapter. She was no longer the quiet girl who had once shrunk into corners, silently absorbing the world's expectations and fears. Now, she had agency, freedom, and, most importantly, the ability to make her own choices. The lottery money, once a secret force of possibility, became not just financial security but a symbol of her autonomy. She used it wisely, not for spectacle, not for validation, but to protect herself, to help others, and to build a life on her own terms. But beyond money, the real wealth she had gained was clarity, self-respect, and the strength to set boundaries. Her relationship with Lucia, her mother, evolved slowly. It was no longer shaped by guilt, dependence, or manipulation. They rebuilt trust, honesty, and mutual respect. Lucia admitted her mistakes, faced the consequences of her choices, and began to act responsibly. Emilina, who had once carried the emotional burden for both of them, now offered guidance only when appropriate, allowing her mother to grow independently. The balance was delicate, but it was genuine and sustainable. Over time, Emilina explored the world and herself. She traveled to places where she was unknown, finding perspective and freedom in anonymity. She returned to her love for writing, rediscovering the words she had abandoned as a child. Each page became a declaration. She had survived, she had endured, and she now controlled her own narrative. Every story she wrote was a conversation with the girl she once was, the girl who had learned that silence was survival, and now she had learned that voice was power. Roberto's schemes were exposed, and justice followed swiftly. Emilina did not attend the trial. She had no need to witness vengeance or spectacle. The law had corrected what charm and deceit could not. She moved on without resentment because she understood that real victory was in maintaining integrity, not seeking revenge. By the anniversary of the wedding that had once shattered her world, Emilina returned to the venue alone, walking through empty halls and silent gardens. She let herself feel every emotion she had once suppressed: pain, anger, disappointment, pride, relief, and finally, release. The event, which had threatened to define her life, had now become a moment of reclamation. She left without looking back, carrying the lessons but leaving the weight behind. Her wealth no longer defined her, her clarity and self-determination did. She established a trust for her mother, security, managing it carefully to ensure independence and protection. When she revealed it, her mother expressed gratitude tempered by humility, not dependence. "Thank you for trusting yourself first," Lucia said, and Emilina recognized it as the greatest acknowledgement she could receive. Years later, Emilina had fully embraced her identity as her own person. She spoke directly, set boundaries without guilt, and engaged in relationships from a place of choice, not obligation. She was visible, confident, and unafraid. The girl who had once hidden in silence now existed fully in the world, shaped by experience, wisdom, and resilience. Late at night, she would reflect on her younger self, feeling compassion and respect rather than pity. The endurance that had once been necessary for survival had now become preparation for freedom. Emilina understood that the hardships she had endured, betrayal, secrecy, and manipulation, had led her to this moment of empowerment. She was no longer afraid of losing herself because she had learned how to protect and honor herself above all else. This story, which began with a lottery ticket, betrayal, and silence, concluded not with riches or revenge, but with clarity, strength, and agency. Emilina had reclaimed her life, written her own rules, and discovered the profound truth: freedom and self-respect are the greatest victories a person can achieve. She was the author of her own story. This time, the pen wrote only for